I'm Michelle Tyreen Johnson. Welcome to Race Unwrapped, a podcast unwrapping all the ways race affects our world, whether we're thinking about it or not. My guest this episode is Sarah Nuñez. She's an educator, activist, and folk healer. We talk about the intersection of race and gender as a Latina, and we talk about healing and self-care. That's all coming up on Race Unwrapped from Louisville Public Media. Welcome to Race Unwrapped. I'm Michelle Tyreen Johnson. My guest today is Sarah Nuñez, activist, educator, and folk healer. Could you tell me a little bit about yourself?
A little about myself. My name's Sarah Cecilia Nuñez. I live in Louisville, Kentucky. Been here for about 5 years. Moved from Asheville, North Carolina in 2015 for a position at the University of Louisville, running programs for Latinx students. Building and running programs for Latinx students. And I was born in Bogota, Colombia, and raised in Raleigh, North Carolina. I came to the United States when I was about 3 years old. And, I'm a Southern woman. I love that identity. I do identify as a Southern woman, and I love to say y'all. I love saying y'all.
I do too. I'm a Midwesterner. I love to say y'all.
Yeah, it's just So I've got, to where to begin, right, with the story. But generally, I'm a full-time PhD student currently studying in the College of Education at the University of Louisville. And I do and run and, founded and helped to coordinate this herb collective called Aflorar, which means to bloom in English. And it's we're a collective of mostly members of Mi Gente, which is a national organization that's fighting for the rights of women's rights. Like we're pro women, pro Black, pro Pueblo, pro worker. And we're like a political home, of organizers. And we started back in April. And so we've been providing herbal care kits and healing accompaniment to folks during the uprisings here in Louisville specifically, but also providing some aid and care to folks across the country.
I love the idea of living things being part of the care package for people.
Yes. The plant medicine, right?
I love that idea.
Yeah, and how do we take care of ourselves, right? What is this like? With the self-preservation, right, during these times is so important. And I think not having right the ceremony, the ritual, the storytelling, or let's put it in the positive, right? Having the storytelling, the ritual, the circle dialogues, the activism, right? The inclusive processes for, learning and unlearning, both our historical, right, our political movements, but also the traditions, right, these healing traditions that are part of most of our cultures. So it's kind of, a project to, unearth a lot of that and also bring us to, a better place personally and collectively.
As a Latinx woman, I wanted to get your feelings, your thoughts on this very, especially living in Louisville, this very specific moment we're in right now. I mean, I know there's a lot of talk and emphasis on the Black Lives Movement and on Black people, but as a fellow woman of color, just from a different background, what are you thinking? What are your thoughts? How do you think people are reacting?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really interesting because, I think inside of, Latinx folk are Black as well. So this movement also, includes, Latinx folk who are also Black. So I think that Black lives absolutely matter and that there's so much that we can be doing individually and collectively to be fighting for, and helping and assisting and advocating for this moment, right? So I think in the place that I sit, I mean, it's both tragic, right, that we have to have, the murder of a woman in her home and all of the other folks who have been murdered and at the hands of state violence, for there to be this wake up call in this moment now. And I think that it's, it's challenging inside of, I think, being Latino or Latinidad, right? In the South specifically is even more of an interesting experience, right? Because our populations have really only been, I mean, we've been here for 50, 60 years, right? Or longer. But the populations have really only been growing over the past 20 years. And, there's, we come from, and I don't want to speak for all Latinos, right? Or for all people, because everyone's got their own experience. But, we come from such, we all come from such brutal pasts, right? So being colonized, right? But also being colonizers. We have really dichotomous, right? Identities because of these histories, right? Our countries have been, had to deal with for, the last 50 years or more, U.S. backed military dictatorships. And then in some cases, histories of what happened in Cuba, where, you had, communist governments, right? And people actually fleeing, right? Communist governments. So it's a really complex thing, right? Because Latin America is, 23 different countries.
Absolutely.
We have, the slave trade was huge there, right? Brazil and Colombia and the Caribbean. And we have this convergence of, European, indigenous, and Black histories, right? Plus the colonizers, plus, right, the stripping, right, of our complete culture and history and traditions. And then, this influx of movement, right, migration into the United States.
And for the record, I don't want you to feel as if I'm trying to have you represent every person of Latin descent.
Oh, yeah.
It's not that at all, but by speaking to someone of Latin descent, talking about these things that folks talk about all the time, I hope what my podcast does is it makes people go, oh, wow, there's a whole different angle of things I don't even think about. That there are people who I pass walking down the street or who I see at work or when I go to the store who have this whole, mental, emotional, historical, familial background that I hadn't even thought about.
Yeah, and I just always preface it that way to be like, it's I have my own analysis of this because I've studied it, because I am actually doing research on it now, and I spend a lot of time sitting around thinking, right, about identity, about the progression of identity, about acculturation and assimilation, about the brutal histories of our countries. So I spend so much time thinking about it that I always like to say, it's this is my own sort of interpretation of it. And you may speak to someone else who's like, ooh, right, or maybe they themselves hadn't thought about it, right? Because I think what happens for Latinos, especially those living in the South, is that, we come here and maybe, and each family has a different story, right? Because some families come, it just becomes so complex that it's wow, if we're talking about specifically what the Colombian experience might be, or what my family's experience might be, could be completely different from another family from the same neighborhood, right?
Right.
In Bogota, Colombia, right? And so it just becomes, it is super complex. It is super complex. I think the race issue is super complex. And then even deeper to that is the immigration stories, right? And then even deeper to that is what is it like to experience that in the southeastern United States?
And then when you go another layer, which is what I'm getting at, being a woman with all of that. Yeah, the role of being a woman, or whether you're leading a family, the matriarch, or whether you're, one of the younger people or whatever. And then right now, because we've got, several things going on, we got the pandemic. For example, is there a way you feel as, and do you prefer Latina, Latinx? What's your preferred term?
Yeah, I'm fine either way. Yeah,
Okay,
Latina,
all right.
Latinx.
Okay, how do you? I mean, what are some observations you're making about how Latinas are having to hold it down during this pandemic right now?
Yeah, I mean, it's between, I think, family obligations, work obligations, like the caretaking in general, right? Of the pressures of all of those pieces. I think part of it, I think has a lot to do with class, right? Like, what do people have access to? And, can they access good medical care and get tested on a regular basis and be able to get the medications that they need? Or is there, are they having to, like, fly under the surface and, kind of use what's available and being provided in community and sort of through these mutual aid networks that are being developed. But yeah, I mean, I think that as in my case, I am a caretaker of both of my elderly parents. And so, I think the pandemic has absolutely, like, heightened the amount of care and nurturing. But then it was also like how I decided to step into the movement, this particular movement, right? In this particular time, I was really more moved to providing, herbal care and remedies and, like, bringing back these concepts of remembering, our traditional healing practices as a way to help us fight, right? And fight back. And so, so I think I think definitely my gender plays into that nurturing and that role of wanting to, support people. I mean, there's so many things that herbs can help with, right? Like anxiety and stress.
I get it. I had this little
over worrying.
I have this herbal blend that I have to take in the morning to both keep my brain sharp and my emotions even. So I get it.
Exactly. Yeah. And how often is it that these things aren't actually readily available for all of our people? And so, so I think that, like, how I've shown up and how it's really impacted me is to say, like, I want to be able to provide folks with the tools they need to be able to show up, right, in their best selves and their higher selves and their ability to, stay strong and resilient and, and then on those days when you don't feel so good, right, having these plant, allies to, like, help assist us with whatever might be happening, right, like deep depression, anxiety, and sometimes even, right, like symptoms of flu and sickness and things like that. You can help, right, make yourself feel a little bit better.
And that's it. And that's it. I mean, just right now, there's so much going on. I mean, I think all of us are dealing with overload, but we're all dealing with it differently. I love the way you're integrating your cultural background in how you're approaching stress and support. That's awesome.
Yeah. And I think it takes shape in other ways as well, right? Like, it's that the act of activism, right, and organizing, right, is also like a healing modality. The act of, like, being able to tell your story or share your story with other people in movement, and then is a healing, right, modality. So
yes, that's honestly why I'm so excited about this podcast, not just this season but future seasons, because it's about just talking to different kinds of people, getting their stories, hearing their different angles on things. I mean, it matters, and it's all so American. We don't think of it. I mean, we've kind of gotten as a country into the bad habit of thinking that I should rephrase that. There are certain aspects of our society that have gotten into thinking that the true American is anything that has light skinned and a UK pedigree, right?
Right.
Maybe some of the other light skinned European countries, but we're all American, right? I mean, you and I are every bit as American as somebody whose folks got here on the Mayflower. So one question I'm trying to remember to ask every woman I talk to as part of this is, what do you think is the greatest source of strength of being a a woman with your background? Whether you want to answer that as as someone from Colombia, whether you want to answer that as a North Carolina Latinx, a Louisville Latinx, a Southern, or as you said earlier, a Southern Latinx. What's your unique sort of superpower?
I think there's this really special piece and part of doing movement work that is based in making, I think, movement or the work that you do like irresistible. And so creating space and place where people can feel like they've arrived home. And I might not always do it perfectly or always with the best finesse, but I feel like in my work, those, like the building bridges and the ability to bring people together towards a common goal, and maybe that goal is a small feat, right? It doesn't have to be something super huge, but that bringing of folk together from various backgrounds and being able to sit with one another and look one another in the eyes and be honest and open and feel like you're home in that space and in that moment in time.
That was Sarah Nuñez, activist, educator, and folk healer. I'm Michelle Tyreen Johnson, and this is Race Unwrapped.
Race Unwrapped is produced by Michelle Tyreen Johnson for Louisville Public Media. Our senior producer is Laura Ellis. Allison Cross created our music. For more information, to contact us, or to support Race Unwrapped, visit wfpl.org/raceunwrapped.